I am neck deep in this. Okay, this is Julia, the girl in the middle. She is a Polish woman who thinks she may be Madeline McCann. A few months ago, her grandmother said something to her. We don't know what she said, but it led her to start researching this. She had never heard of Madeline McCann. And then looking back, she's like, well, I don't really remember my childhood either. It's very blurry. Whenever she asks her parents about it, they change the subject. They're very weird about it. She's never seen a picture of her mom pregnant with her. She's asked for that, and they laugh, and they're like, you're crazy. She also said things just don't add up when her parents do tell her information about her childhood. For instance, she has a childhood teacher who told her that she didn't always attend school from the beginning when she was little. She came later on. Her parents say that's not true. She attended from day one, so that doesn't make sense to her. She's also a victim of German pedophile Peter Ney, who she says is Martin Ney's son. Martin Ney is a pedophile and German serial killer who was questioned and suspected of Madeline's disappearance. They do have similar physical features, their chin, their nose, but mostly the same mark on the right eye, although Julia does address that hers has faded a little bit as she's gotten older. There's also a comparison of Julia and an age-progressed picture of what they thought Madeline may look like in 2010 at age 7, and those do look very, very similar. The only thing is Julia's 21, Madeline would be 19 at this point, but she believes her age may have been alive her whole life. The McCanns are not taking any chances, and so as of today, they have agreed to do a DNA test to see if there's any validity to the story. That this is going to be insane. I'm on the edge of my seat.
This house holds one of the strangest true crime cases you'll ever hear. Over 60 years ago, a man named Dr. Harold Perilson lived here with his wife and children. One early morning in December 1959, the doctor snapped. He killed his wife in her sleep using a hammer, then went to his daughter's bedroom. He tried to kill his oldest daughter the same way, but missed. She fled the house. He overdosed, taking his own life and leaving his 3 children with no parents. To this day, nobody knows what drove a seemingly successful doctor to do this.
Better than it was, ain't it?
Gemma Mitchell was a 34-year-old woman living in England. Sometime in August 2020, she met 64-year-old Mi Kwan Chong, also known as Deborah. The pair actually met at church and became friends very quickly. Now, Deborah was a widow that suffered from mental illness, and Gemma sort of became a type of healer for Deborah. Deborah was undoubtedly very generous to Gemma. As the pair became friends, Gemma told Deborah about some of her money problems and the need to renovate the house she was living in. Now, Deborah, wanting to help, made a very generous offer to lend Gemma £200,000. Gemma accepted immediately, but when Deborah thought about it, she actually rescinded that offer and told Gemma that she should instead sell the house and enjoy her money. Needless to say, Gemma was mad. On the morning of the 11th of June 2020, Gemma travelled to Deborah's house in Wembley. She brought a very large suitcase with her. The suitcase you saw being dragged at the beginning of this footage. She would spend 5 hours at Deborah's house before leaving with the same suitcase, now looking much more full. After this incident, Deborah would be reported missing, and Gemma would conveniently have in her possession a will that would make her the beneficiary of Deborah's £700,000 estate. The 26th of June in Devon, the body of Deborah would turn up. It would be found by some holiday makers in the area. Strangely, Deborah's head would be removed from her body. That would be found 4 days later, about 10 meters away from where they found Deborah's body. What happens next in part 2? And for more 7 Sin crime stories, you can hit that plus.
Yesterday, 8 family members were found shot to death inside of a home in the small town of Enoch, Utah. They were all members of the same family, and police have determined that it was a murder-suicide. According to authorities, the bodies of 5 children and 3 adults were found inside the home suffering from gunshot wounds after police conducted a welfare check. Police determined that the father, 42-year-old Michael Haidt, shot his 5 children, his wife, his mother-in-law, and then himself. According to authorities, just 2 weeks ago on December 21st, Michael's wife filed for divorce, and ever since his mother-in-law had been supporting her. The children were ages 17 to 4 years old. Enoch, Utah is about 245 miles from Salt Lake City and is a really tight-knit community. City councilmen and other residents of the community are in complete shock and have described the Haidts as a wonderful family who were very well respected and well known in the area.
This man has just rose from the dead. Honestly, I can't believe I'm reading this. You may have seen the famous Netflix show Tiger King, you know, about this guy and the woman, Carol Baskin. And literally back in 2020 there was this whole meme on TikTok about Carol Baskin killing her husband and whatever, because he had been missing for like 30 years. Now, her husband was last seen in 1997, and as of 2002 he was actually pronounced officially dead, because no one knew where he was. And the whole rumour, of course, was that Carol Baskin killed him and fed him to the tigers. It has just come out. The CEA have just come out saying they have found him alive in Costa Rica. What's he doing out there? Yep, and if you remember, Carol said that he ran off with like $1 million and went away. That's what she said happened to him. And maybe that did happen because he's just been found alive in Costa Rica. So yeah. But there's not been any photos shown of him yet. For a case so big and popular as this, I'm struggling to see why. But, we'll see. Let me know in the comments down below what you think.
2 moms chatting at a water park were able to solve a 30-year-old cold case. On Thanksgiving weekend 1989, a teenager named Mandy Stavik went on a jog with her German Shepherd in Acme, Washington. The dog came back, but she didn't. And sadly, her body was found 3 days later on the bank of a nearby river. Because she was in the water, a lot of the evidence had been washed off, but police were able to pull male DNA from her. At the time, there were no matches in the system, and Mandy's murder would go unsolved for 3 decades. Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson were among a group of moms who had begun gossiping while their kids played together at the water park. One of the moms brought up an unsolved murder in their hometown of Acme. This is when Heather blurted out that she thinks she knew who did it, and Marilee said she did too. It turns out that both of them had independent, creepy experiences with the same man, Tim Bass. One day, Tim Bass knocked on Marilee's door and asked to use the phone. This was before the time of cell phones, so it wasn't completely unusual. But Marilee's phone volume was up loud enough to know that he wasn't actually having a conversation on the phone. And when he hung up, he started telling Marilee about how he was secretly in love with her and how he would drive past her house every day and watch her in the yard. She threatened to call the police, and thankfully Tim left without incident. Meanwhile, Heather caught a ride from her friend one day who happened to also be friends with Tim. Since there was no back seat in his truck, she sat in the middle console with the friend driving and then Tim Bass sitting in the passenger seat. Tim Bass was aggressively flirting with her, and she found this really creepy since she was just 15 and he was 21. The 2 women went to the police with the suspicion that Tim Bass was the one who killed Mandy. The police then went to his manager at the local bakery, who was more than happy to help them collect a DNA sample. She grabbed his used Coke can out of the trash, and the police tested the DNA taken from the lip of the can against the DNA that was found on Mandy's body. And it was a match. It made no sense that Tim Bass's DNA would be on Mandy unless he was the one who killed her. At his trial, Tim Bass, who was now 51, was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Even when a case goes unsolved for decades, there's still hope. Comment any other cases you want me to cover down below.
So whatever happened to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment at the Oxford Apartments? If you don't remember, this is where Jeffrey Dahmer was eventually caught, and this is where they found all of the gruesome discoveries associated with Jeffrey Dahmer. It's absolutely eerie to look at photos of his apartment and consider what they found in there. But what happened to the building, the Oxford Apartments building? Well, obviously after investigators discovered what they did in Jeffrey's apartment, the place was stained forever. And so shortly after all this happened, the apartments, the entire complex, they were demolished. And nowadays all that's left is this patch of grass where the apartments once stood. It's gotta be eerie living in one of these units and knowing exactly what happened right here. I actually went and filmed a whole Jeffrey Dahmer documentary where we visited the old Oxford Apartments area and investigated for paranormal activity. Let me tell you, that place is loaded with energy. At one point, using our devices, we captured what looked like bodies laying on the ground, like 3 or 4 of them. And I think at one point, using one of our devices, we literally heard the voice of Jeffrey Dahmer coming through. I'm not kidding, I know that sounds really extreme, but you have to listen to the video and just see what I'm talking about. Anyways, it's called The Ghost of Jeffrey Dahmer if you want to look it up and learn more about the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And my wife and I actually did a whole Dahmer series on our podcast, Murder in America, if you want to listen to what I'm talking about.
This case will put you off ever talking to anyone online. This male stabbed his girlfriend over 90 times and then FaceTimed his sister to show her the dead body. Ashley Wadsworth was a 19-year-old girl who met Jack Seppel on Facebook in 2015. She was roughly 11 or 12 at the time, and Jack was around 15 or 16. They spent the following years continuously sharing messages and chatting online about their lives. Now, Ashley was from Canada and Jack was from Essex in the UK. Jack treated her really nicely to begin with, talking to her all the time and showering her with gifts and attention. When Ashley turned 16, the relationship between the two began to develop. Ashley would ask her parents often if she could go to the UK to travel to meet Jack. At first they were obviously against this, seeing as Jack lived abroad and the two had never met. However, in 2021, Ashley had graduated high school and saved up to make the trip to meet Jack. Jack actually reassured Ashley's family that he would guard her with his life. Little did they know, she wouldn't actually need protecting from anyone other than him. In November 2021, the pair met for the first time. They went sightseeing around London and Ashley documented this on her social media. However, things began to take a turn over the next couple of months. Jack started controlling Ashley. He demanded her social media passwords and made her delete photos without him in them. He also became physically abusive towards her. She was covered in bruises from Jack, and in one altercation, he smashed a glass over her head. The young girl tried to reach out for help from her friends, but it was clear she was scared of Jack. Bearing in mind Jack had access to all of her social media, she sent a message to one of her friends one day warning, "Be careful what you say, he's watching," and she then unsent the message to prevent him seeing it. On the 1st of February 2022, Ashley turned up to Jack's mum's flat barefoot. She had run there, she was crying and hysterical. She said Jack had smashed her phone, beat her up and cut her hand. Now, following this incident, her parents actually booked her a flight home. She was relieved by this and returned to Jack's flat to wait to go home. Now that day, bearing in mind this is now obviously nighttime in Canada, Ashley's sister received a text begging her to wake up and answer the phone. When she eventually got this message, she tried to ring Ashley back and got no reply. At this point, Jack's mum tried to go round to Jack's house and get in. She wasn't able to do so and the police were eventually called. When officers arrived, Jack wouldn't open the door, so they forced entry. They found an absolutely hideous scene. Jack was lying next to Ashley's dead body in a pool of blood. Jack was casually on FaceTime to his sister, showing her the dead body. He admitted to strangling her and stabbing her. Jack was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23.5 years. This is the disturbing case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 6-year-old Alicia MacPhail was abducted from her bed. She'd been staying with her grandparents in the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold that evening. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. Aaron apparently became upset in the night because he had been arguing with his mum. He had had a challenging upbringing involving physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided that evening he wanted to get some substances to smoke from a couple that he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad Robert and his girlfriend. They'd been known to sell substances to Aaron previously, but he could not get hold of them. Intending to go and steal them off them, Aaron armed himself with a knife. He headed to Robert's house where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. This was obviously where Alicia was staying that evening. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the 6-year-old sleeping in her bed and took the opportunity to snatch the poor defenseless young child. Disgustingly, he carried her to a secluded location, SA'd her and then killed her. He then disposed of his clothes in the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, Alicia's grandparents woke up to discover that the little girl was missing. They straight away alerted police and locals. When the family asked Aaron to keep an eye out for the little girl, he texted them back saying, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered Alicia's lifeless body around 15 minutes away from her house. Along with a lot of the local community, Aaron's mum actually checked her CCTV of her house. She was hoping that this would help with the investigation, and it definitely did. She saw her son leaving and returning from the house that night, and she handed the evidence over to police. Aaron was arrested, and it was discovered that the clothes that he'd abandoned on the beach did actually match with his DNA. Aaron's mum also confirmed that the kitchen knife found at the scene did come from her kitchen. Aaron's Google history showed that he'd searched "how do police find DNA" and also visited a website about collecting DNA evidence. He was given a life sentence of 20 years for the killing of Alicia MacPhail. He was given 27 years, but this was reduced to 24 years on appeal. He'll be moving to an adult prison when he turns 21.